Secrets, like wounds, can bleed silently for decades. My husband kept one that nearly destroyed our marriage, beginning with a strange ritual every Wednesday at 4 a.m. Good day, my dear viewers. I'm Helen Williams, 78 years old, and today I'm sharing a story I've kept deep in my heart for over 50 years. Before I begin, if you're watching now, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue sharing my life stories. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. It would bring me such joy to know. It was 1962. I was 25 and living in a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. The streets weren't all paved yet, and we knew all our neighbors by name. Back then, women spent a lot of time at home caring for children and the household. I was no different. I had married Robert 5 years earlier, a hard-working man who managed to provide us with our own home, something few young couples achieved in those days. Robert worked at a steel mill and always came home tired, but never complained. He was a good husband, attentive to our son Michael, who had just turned 5. I was proud of the beautiful family we had built, despite the difficulties. Back then, we didn't have much, but what we had seemed enough. At least that's what I thought. Our routine was simple. Robert left for work at 7 a.m. I took care of the house and Michael. Sometimes I did embroidery to sell, a little extra money I kept hidden in a cookie tin. Women of my generation always had these secret savings. You know how it is. In the afternoons, I would chat with the neighbors by the fence, exchanging recipes, talking about our children, commenting on neighborhood news. One of these neighbors was Carmen, who lived in the house across from ours. She had a boy named August, 2 years older than my Michael. The boys played together sometimes when August was feeling well, because you see, August had a heart condition. Back then, we didn't have the medical resources of today, and his health was always a concern for everyone. Carmen's husband, Anthony, worked in sales and traveled frequently. Every Wednesday, he would leave very early and wouldn't return until Thursday night. Carmen often said these were the most difficult days for her, especially when August wasn't doing well. I felt sorry for her, but never imagined those Wednesdays hid a secret that would change my life forever. It was on a rainy Monday in April, a day I'll never forget. I woke up in the middle of the night to a noise in the living room. I looked over and saw that Robert wasn't in bed. The clock showed 4:12 a.m. I thought he might be feeling ill, so I got up to look for him. When I reached the hallway, I saw his silhouette against the living room window. Robert was standing there, motionless, staring outside. At first, I thought he might have insomnia or was worried about something at work. I went back to bed quietly. I didn't want to disturb him. The next morning, I didn't mention anything. I thought it was just a passing thing. But on Wednesday of that same week, I woke up again, as if something inside me knew I needed to check. And there he was, at the same time, in the same position, looking out the window. That's when I realized he was watching the house across the street, Carmen's house. I went back to bed with my heart racing. Why would my husband be watching the neighbor's house in the early hours? 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind. Could Robert be interested in Carmen? Were they having an affair? The idea made me sick to my stomach. The following week, I anxiously waited for Wednesday, and it happened again. And the next week too, always at 4 a.m., always looking at the house across the street. I began to notice how Robert and Carmen behaved when they met. There was nothing suspicious, no lingering looks, no secret smiles. They barely spoke beyond what was necessary. This confused me even more. For 3 months, I kept this observation to myself. 3 months of sleepless nights, of suspicion, of fear. I loved Robert, loved the life we had built. I was afraid of what I would discover if I asked. Sometimes, it's easier to live with doubt than to face a truth that could destroy everything. In those days, women were taught not to question their husbands. Marital problems were private matters, kept under lock and key. Nobody got divorced. Even if the marriage was falling apart, we endured, swallowed our tears, and carried on for the children, for appearances, for what others would say. But the situation was consuming me from within. I lost weight and couldn't concentrate on household tasks. I kept looking out the window, trying to understand what was in the house across the street that attracted my husband's attention in the early hours of Wednesday mornings. That's when I noticed another pattern. August, Carmen's son, seemed to have his health crises more frequently on Wednesdays. I had seen the ambulance stop in front of their house several times, coincidentally on these days. Could there be a connection? On the last Wednesday of July 1962, I gathered my courage. I set the alarm for 3:45 a.m. I dressed in silence and waited in the dark kitchen. Like clockwork, Robert got up at 4 o'clock and went to the living room window. I let a few minutes pass and then turned on the light. "What are you doing, Robert?" I asked with a trembling voice. He turned around startled, as if he'd seen a ghost. "Helen, you scared me. I just have insomnia." For 3 months, every Wednesday, always looking at Carmen's house. He tried to cover it up, said I was imagining things, but I couldn't accept excuses anymore. "I've heard her boy has worse attacks on Wednesdays. Does this have something to do with you watching their house?" It was as if something broke inside him. Robert sat on the sofa and covered his face with his hands. I'll never forget what he said next. "August is my son, Helen." 5 words, 5 simple words that collapsed the world I knew. I stood paralyzed, barely able to breathe properly. The room started to spin, and I had to hold onto the wall to keep from falling. "What do you mean, your son? What are you saying?" My voice came out as a thread, almost a whisper. Robert began to cry, something I had rarely seen in all our years of marriage. With his voice broken by sobs, he told me everything. Before meeting me, he had a brief relationship with Carmen. At the time, she was already married to Anthony, but he traveled a lot and she felt lonely. It was a brief affair, just a few weeks. When she discovered she was pregnant, Carmen ended everything with Robert. She said the child would be raised as Anthony's and Robert should never contact her again. She said if I told anyone, Anthony would kill her. I believed it. Everyone knew he had a terrible temper. Less than a month after this breakup, Robert met me at a dance. We started dating and soon got married. He never told me about Carmen. He said he thought it was a closed chapter in his life. Until, by twist of fate, we ended up buying a house right across from hers. When we moved here and I saw it was her house, I nearly died of shock. But what could I do? We had already bought the house. You were so happy. The worst came later. August was born with a congenital heart defect. Carmen, desperate, secretly sought out Robert and said she needed money for treatments. Anthony earned well, but it wasn't enough for all the medications and specialist consultations. I helped as I could, Helen. I gave her money for years, hidden from you, hidden from Anthony. What else could I do? He's my son. As he spoke, I felt each word like a stone thrown at me. Our Michael was 5 years old. I had always believed he was Robert's firstborn, his first and only child. But there was another living right across from us all this time. "Why do you look out the window on Wednesdays?" I managed to ask between tears. "Is it because that's when Anthony travels? August always gets worse on these days, as if he misses his father, the man he thinks is his father. Carmen told me once that he gets anxiety attacks when Anthony isn't around, and it affects his heart. I can't do anything. I can't go over there. I can't comfort him. So I stand here watching, waiting to see a light on, some movement that tells me he's okay. I didn't know what to feel. First, Robert's betrayal. The fact that he had hidden this for years. The revelation that my son wasn't the first. The money he gave to Carmen behind my back. Or the horror of that innocent child's situation who suffered without knowing who his real father was. That night, I couldn't say anything more. I asked Robert to sleep in the living room and locked the bedroom door. I cried until dawn, a silent cry not to wake Michael, my son, who I now knew was not the only one. The days that followed were the most difficult of my life. I looked at Robert and saw a stranger. I looked at the house across the street and felt a mixture of anger and compassion. And worst of all, When I met Carmen at neighborhood gatherings, I had to pretend everything was normal, while inside, I was shattered. Anyone who has felt betrayal knows how hard it is to keep breathing, to keep living as if nothing happened. The pain is physical, as if someone had torn something out of you. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly. I lost so much weight that the neighbors started to comment, thinking I was ill. And in a way, I was sick with sadness, with disappointment. Oh, my dear viewers, it's hard for you young people to imagine how it was back then. Today, perhaps I would have asked for a divorce immediately. But in 1962, a divorced woman was seen as a failure, was pointed at in the street. I had no profession, no way to support Michael alone. And more than that, despite everything, I still loved Robert. How to explain that? Sometimes, the heart keeps loving even when the mind screams to stop. For weeks, I lived in a kind of waking nightmare. I walked around the house like a ghost, fulfilling my duties as a mother and housewife out of pure automatism. When Michael asked if I was sick, I forced a smile and said it was just tiredness. How could I explain to a 5-year-old child that his world had also been turned upside down, although he didn't know it yet? Robert tried to get close. Sometimes he came home with flowers, something he had never done before. He brought small gifts for me, toys for Michael. I know he was desperate to fix what had been broken. But how do you repair trust when it breaks? It's like a mirror. Even when glued back together, the cracks remain visible forever. The worst were the Wednesdays. I couldn't sleep on those nights anymore. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing that Robert was in the living room, looking out the window, worried about a son he couldn't call his own. Sometimes curiosity won, and I would get up stealthily to observe him from afar. Seeing him there, so fragile, so helpless, awakened contradictory feelings in me. I wanted to hate him completely, but I couldn't. One of those Wednesdays, in September 1962, I heard a commotion in the street, sirens, raised voices. I ran to the window and saw an ambulance parked in front of Carmen's house. Robert was already at the door, wearing the first coat he found. Our eyes met. There was desperation in his. "It's August," he said simply. "I've had a bad feeling all night." I was paralyzed, not knowing how to react. Part of me wanted to say, "It's not our problem." Another part knew that somehow it was. August, that skinny boy with large eyes, was my Michael's half-brother. They shared the same blood, the same father, though they didn't know it. "Go," I finally said. "Find out what's happening." Robert rushed out. I stayed at the window watching. I saw when he approached one of the paramedics. I saw when Carmen came out of the house crying, accompanied by doctors carrying a stretcher. On top of it, a small, motionless body that made my heart ache. I stood there immobile, watching the scene unfold as if watching a movie. I saw when they put August in the ambulance, when Carmen got in right after. I saw when Robert returned to the house with a face so pale he looked like he'd seen a ghost. He had a cardiac arrest. His voice came out broken. They managed to revive him, but it's very serious. They're taking him to Massachusetts General Hospital. At that moment, something changed inside me. The anger was still there, the pain of betrayal too. But something else emerged, a genuine concern for that innocent child who was not to blame for anything. How will Carmen manage alone? Anthony is traveling, isn't he? I found myself asking. Robert looked at me surprised, as if he didn't expect me to care. "She's going to call her sister, but she lives far away. It will take hours to get here." I made a decision that surprised us both. "I'll get Michael ready, and we'll go to the hospital. She shouldn't be alone at a time like this." Robert's expression, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and disbelief, is something I still remember clearly. He didn't say anything, just nodded with tears in his eyes. We arrived at Massachusetts General Hospital shortly after 7 a.m. The imposing building, with its endless corridors, smelled of disinfectant and fear. We found Carmen sitting alone in the waiting room, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. When she raised her eyes and saw me beside Robert, With Michael half asleep in my arms, her face first showed surprise, then panic. Did she know that I knew? Had Robert told her about our conversation? To this day I'm not certain, but the way she averted her gaze, unable to look me directly in the eye, gave me the answer. "I came to help," I said simply, sitting beside her. "No one should go through this alone." Carmen began to cry silently, tears streaming down her pale, tired face. For a moment, I forgot all the hurt and just held her hand. Two mothers united by concern for a child. That was the only truth that mattered at that moment. The hours in the hospital seemed endless. Michael ended up making friends with a nurse who gave him pencil and paper to draw. Robert walked back and forth, smoking one cigarette after another. In those days, you could smoke in hospitals. Imagine that. Carmen and I remained seated side by side, in a silence loaded with unspoken words. In the middle of the afternoon, a doctor finally appeared. He was an older man, with gray hair and a serious expression. "Mrs. Thompson," he called, looking at Carmen. "Your son is stable, but the situation is serious. His heart is very compromised. He needs surgery that we don't do here in the U.S. The doctor explained that there was a new procedure being performed in Europe that could help August, but it cost a fortune, far beyond what an American middle-class family could pay in 1962. Carmen collapsed. I saw the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation any mother would feel, knowing she couldn't save her child. "Is there no other option, doctor?" Robert asked, his voice trembling. "We can stabilize him with medication, try to keep his condition controlled, but in the long term..." The doctor didn't complete the sentence. He didn't need to. We returned home in the late afternoon. August would remain hospitalized for a few days. Carmen would stay at the hospital. Her sister had arrived and would stay with her. The way back was silent. Michael fell asleep in the back seat of the car, exhausted from the long wait at the hospital. That night, after putting Michael to bed, I sat at the kitchen table. Robert prepared a strong coffee for us both, a rarity, since making coffee was usually my job. "Why did you go to the hospital today?" he finally asked, breaking the heavy silence. I looked at the steaming cup in front of me, seeking an answer that even I didn't completely understand. "Because a boy was dying," I replied at last. "And why? Because he's Michael's brother, even if nobody else knows it." Robert held my hand on the table, a gesture so simple yet so powerful at the same time. It was the first time I had allowed his touch since the revelation. "What are we going to do?" he asked. And there was so much pain and uncertainty in his voice that I felt my heart soften a little more. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I think we need to help somehow." In the days that followed, an idea began to form in my mind. That cookie tin, where I kept the money from my embroidery sales, wasn't much, but maybe it could help with the medications. I never told Robert about these savings. It was my little secret, my security for hard times. And what harder time could there be? A week later, when August was already home, I made a decision. I took all the money from the tin, almost 2 years of savings, and put it in an envelope. It wasn't nearly enough for the surgery in Europe, but it could help with the expensive medications the boy would need to take. I waited until a Wednesday, when I knew Anthony would be traveling. I went to the neighborhood drugstore and asked to speak with Mr. Jenkins, the pharmacist who knew everyone in the neighborhood. "I want to pay for Carmen's son's medications," I told him in a low voice. "But I don't want anyone to know it was me." Mr. Jenkins looked at me confused, but didn't ask questions. In those days, people respected each other's privacy more. I handed over the envelope with the money and explained that when Carmen came to pick up August's medications, he should say that a charitable soul had paid in advance. "She'll refuse if she knows it's me," I explained. "It's important she thinks it was someone from the church or anyone else." Perhaps you're wondering why I did this. Why help the child of the woman who had slept with my husband? The answer isn't simple. Part of it was for August, an innocent child suffering. Part was for Michael, who unknowingly had a brother. And part, believe it or not, was for myself. I realized that resentment was consuming me from within, transforming me into a bitter person I didn't want to be. The following Sunday, during lunch after church, Carmen came to our table at the Square's diner. Her eyes were teary. "You won't believe it," she said, looking mainly at me. "Someone paid in advance for August's medication at the pharmacy, 6 months' worth of medication." Robert gave me a questioning look. I feigned surprise. "How wonderful," I replied with a smile. "It must have been someone from the congregation. Father Joseph always mentions your boy in the prayers." Carmen wiped away a tear. "It's a miracle, especially now that Anthony is having problems at his company and money is tight." At that moment, looking at the relief on her face, I felt something strange inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a small step towards peace. The weeks passed, turning into months. Autumn gave way to winter, winter to spring. My relationship with Robert remained fragile, but we were trying to rebuild bit by bit. He stopped waking up in the middle of the night to look out the window, at least not that I noticed. Instead, he would stop by the pharmacy every week to discreetly ask Mr. Jenkins about August's medications. One night, in June 1963, while washing the dinner dishes, I asked a question that had been tormenting me. "Did you love Carmen?" Robert, who was drying the dishes beside me, stopped, surprised by the sudden question. "No," he answered after a moment of reflection. "It was a mistake, Helen. She was alone. I was alone. Anthony traveled too much. It wasn't love, it was weakness." I continued washing the dishes, absorbing that answer. "And August, do you love him?" This question was harder, more painful. I saw when Robert swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the plate he was drying for too long. "I've never been able to be his father," he finally said. "But yes, I love him as much as I love Michael, just in a different way, a way that hurts more, because I can never show it." That answer, so honest and so sad, opened another small crack in the wall I had built around my heart. The following month, August had another crisis. This time, Robert and I went to the hospital together. We no longer needed excuses. The neighbors thought it natural that we would help, since Carmen was alone most of the time. Anthony, always absent, called from out of town, but said he couldn't return before the end of the week. It was during this hospitalization that we met Dr. Paul Matthews, a young cardiologist who had specialized in Europe. He became interested in August's case and mentioned that a hospital in Boston was beginning to perform the procedure that previously could only be done abroad. "It's still experimental," he explained, "and expensive, but not as expensive as going to Europe." Hope emerged like a small flame. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for August. On the way home, Robert was different. There was a determination in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. "I'm going to sell the car," he announced suddenly as we were having dinner. "What?" I exclaimed in surprise. That Chevrolet was his pride, the fruit of years of saving. "For August's surgery," he explained. "It won't be enough, but it's a start." I looked at him for a long moment. The man in front of me was no longer the irresponsible young man who had betrayed everyone's trust. He was a father willing to sacrifice everything for a son, even a son he couldn't call his own. "Don't sell the car," I said finally. "I have a better idea." The next day, I sought out my friend Constance, who worked at the town hall. I told her about August, about the surgery, about the need to raise funds. I didn't mention, of course, the boy's true relationship with my family. Constance suggested organizing a charity event with the church's support, something common in those days, to help families in difficulty. And so was born the Solidarity Bazaar for Little August, held on a sunny Sunday in August 1963 in the courtyard of the main church. I donated all the embroidery I had at home. I convinced the neighbors to donate cakes and crafts. I got local businesses to offer items for an auction. Robert worked tirelessly on the organization, carrying tables, setting up booths, talking to everyone about the importance of the cause. Carmen cried with emotion, seeing the community mobilize for her son. Anthony, usually absent, attended the event and even gave an emotional speech thanking everyone. I observed Robert during that speech. There was pain in his eyes, but also a kind of dignified resignation. He would never be recognized as August's father, but he was doing everything he could behind the scenes. The bazaar was a success beyond expectations. We raised almost half the amount needed for the surgery. The rest came from an unexpected source. The company where Anthony worked organized a collection among employees. The director, moved by the story, complimented the missing amount. In October 1963, the big day arrived. August would be operated on by Dr. Paul Matthews at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the few in the United States that performed such complex cardiac surgeries at the time. The eve was nerve-wracking for everyone. I remember preparing a food basket for Carmen to take to the hospital, since she would be there for many days. I made sure to include homemade sweets for the waiting moments. Sometimes, it's in these small gestures that we reveal more about our feelings than in grand declarations. Robert hardly slept that night. I could hear his footsteps around the house, restless. His unease was palpable, as if it were he himself who was about to be operated on. In a way, I think a part of him would be in that operating room with August, the part that could never reveal itself, that lived hidden in the shadows of our life. In the morning, Carmen stopped by our house before going to the hospital. Anthony had already taken August earlier for the initial preparations. She looked exhausted, with deep circles under her eyes betraying sleepless nights. "I can stay with Michael while you go to the hospital," I offered. It was the first time I suggested that Robert go to the hospital without me, and the look we exchanged contained an entire silent dialogue. "No," Carmen replied, surprising us. "I'd like you to come too, Helen. You've been a strength for me these months." Those words hit me in a way I didn't expect. The woman in front of me didn't know, or at least pretended not to know, that I knew the truth about August. To her, I was just a supportive neighbor, a friend in difficult times. The irony of the situation was almost too painful to bear. We left Michael with Mrs. Baker, an elderly lady who lived on the same street and always offered to look after the neighborhood children. In the car, on the way to the hospital, the silence was heavy. Carmen seated in the back, Robert driving, me beside him. A seemingly normal scene for any external observer. But among the three of us circulated an almost electric tension, made of secrets, guilt, and omissions. The hospital was packed that Monday morning. We found Anthony in the waiting room, nervously smoking one cigarette after another. He acknowledged our presence with a nod. I always thought Anthony a distant man, closed in on himself. At that moment, looking at his solitary figure, I wondered how much he really knew. Did he suspect? Did he, like me, prefer to live with doubt rather than face a devastating truth? The wait for surgery was endless. 6 hours that felt like 6 days. Carmen prayed softly, holding a rosary between her trembling fingers. Anthony alternated between nervous walks down the corridor and cigarettes hastily smoked in the outdoor area. Robert remained seated, motionless like a statue, his gaze fixed on the door through which the doctors would eventually emerge. I observed everyone, feeling simultaneously part of and alien to that family drama, like a piece that doesn't fit perfectly in the puzzle, but that can't be removed without everything collapsing. So many unspoken truths hung in the air of that waiting room. So many words choked in all our throats. Finally, Dr. Paul Matthews appeared, still wearing his surgical cap. His young face looked tired, but there was a gleam in his eyes that made my heart leap. The surgery was a success, he announced. And it was as if the entire room breathed in unison for the first time in hours. August responded very well to the procedure. He's a strong boy. Carmen collapsed in tears in Anthony's arms, who seemed to have aged 10 years that day. Robert turned his face to hide his emotion, but I could see the tears that silently streamed down. As for me, I felt such relief that my legs weakened, and I had to sit down. The doctor explained that August would stay in the ICU for a few days, then be transferred to a regular room. Recovery would be long, but the prospects were encouraging. For the first time in years, there was real hope that he could have an almost normal life. "You have a very brave boy," said Dr. Matthews before leaving. "He's going to need all your support in the coming months." That phrase, "all your support," echoed in my mind throughout the journey back home. Who was the you in this story? Anthony, the father on record; Carmen, the mother who kept the secret; Robert, the biological father who observed from afar; or me, the stranger who knew everything and chose to help instead of destroy? The following months were of slow recovery for August. He returned home after 3 weeks in the hospital, still fragile, but visibly better. Color had returned to his face, and for the first time since we had known him, he could play without getting tired after just a few minutes. Our routine adjusted to include frequent visits to the house across the street. Michael and August became closer friends, sharing toys and comic books. Observing them together was a bittersweet experience for me. 2 brothers who would never know they shared the same blood. Robert assumed the role of uncle to August, taking the boys fishing at the river on Sundays, teaching them to fly kites, helping with schoolwork. It was the maximum expression of fatherhood he could display without raising suspicions. I could see the joy in his eyes when August ran to hug him, affectionately calling him Uncle Bob. Carmen and I developed a strange friendship, built on half-truths and eloquent silences. We never spoke openly about the past, about what had happened before I came on the scene. There were moments, however, when our gazes crossed over the heads of the boys playing, and I was certain she knew that I knew. It was a tacit agreement to preserve the peace, to protect the children, not to dig up what was already buried. Anthony continued to travel a lot, but I noticed he began to dedicate more time to August when he was home. Perhaps the near loss of his son had awakened something in him. Or perhaps deep down, he also suspected the truth, and was, in his own way, marking his territory. I'll never know for sure. In July 1964, we organized a big party to celebrate August's birthday. 1 year after the surgery, he was practically recovered. He still needed to take medications and have regular checkups, but he was essentially a normal 9-year-old boy. The transformation was almost miraculous. The party took place in our backyard, which was larger than theirs. Robert built a swing specially for the occasion, and I spent days preparing sweets and snacks. We invited all the neighborhood children, August's schoolmates, friends, and relatives of the family. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, full of children's laughter, music playing on the record player, adults talking in small groups while watching the children run across the lawn. From a distance, we looked like 2 ordinary families, united by friendship and neighborhood. Who could imagine the invisible ties that connected us, the untold stories that pulsated beneath the surface of that apparent normality? There was a moment during the party that stayed etched in my memory. August had just blown out the candles on the cake, and everyone was applauding. Carmen had borrowed a camera to capture the moment. She asked Robert, who was near the boy, to pose for a photo with August. I saw when Anthony, from the other side of the yard, observed the scene with an expression impossible to decipher. For a terrifying instant, I thought he was going to intervene, that something was going to explode right there in front of everyone. But he just took a sip of his beer and turned his face away. The photo was taken. Robert and August smiling, the uncle's arm affectionately resting on the boy's shoulder. That image, which would later be framed in Carmen's living room, contained all the complexity of our situation. A fragment of truth hidden in plain sight. As the years passed, our strange dynamic consolidated. The 2 families were inextricably linked, for better or worse. We shared Sunday lunches, beach vacations, Christmas and New Year celebrations. The boys grew up attending the same school, sharing friends and experiences. It was almost as if we were an extended family, united by ties that no one dared to name. In 1967, when August was 12 and Michael 10, something happened that shook our fragile stability. Anthony received a job transfer offer to San Francisco. The company he worked for was expanding and offered him a management position in the new branch, a significant promotion he couldn't refuse. The news fell like a bomb in our lives. The idea of August moving far away was devastating for Robert. For years, he had built his veiled fatherhood through proximity, through small daily interactions, through constant presence. How could he maintain this bond with hundreds of miles of distance? I remember the night when Robert came home after Carmen gave the news. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a single day. "They're moving at the end of the year," he said with a choked voice, sitting heavily at the kitchen table. "Anthony has already accepted the position." I served him a cup of strong coffee, saying nothing. What could be said? What right did we have to interfere in that family's life? What argument could we use to ask them to stay without revealing the truth we had tried so hard to keep buried? The months leading up to the move were marked by a silent sadness in our house. Robert spent more time than ever with August, teaching him to play baseball, helping him with school projects, taking him fishing on weekends. It was as if he was trying to compress years of fatherhood into a few months, to store enough memories to fill the void that would come. Michael also suffered, without completely understanding why his friend's departure affected his parents so much. "Can we visit them in San Francisco, can't we?" he asked innocently. "Or can they visit us during vacations?" We said yes, of course, we would keep in touch, but all the adults involved knew it wouldn't be the same. The distance would change everything. The boys would grow up separated, follow different paths. The fragile balance we had built over the years would be broken forever. One night, about a month before the scheduled moving date, Robert came home agitated, with a strange gleam in his eyes. "What if we moved too?" he asked abruptly while I was washing the dinner dishes. "To San Francisco, I mean. There are steel mills there too. I could get a job." The suggestion caught me completely unprepared. Leave our house, our jobs, our life in Boston to follow August's family. It was an absurd idea. And yet, looking at Robert's hopeful expression, I understood the desperation that motivated him. "Robert," I replied softly, drying my hands on the apron, "think carefully about what you're suggesting. We have a life here. Michael has his friends, his school. I have my work with the embroidery. You have stability at the mill. Moving to San Francisco would be starting from scratch, with no guarantees." "But August," he began, and didn't need to finish the sentence. "August has a father and mother," I completed. And I saw the pain my words caused. "Anthony has been a good father to him all these years. He'll be fine." It was harsh, but necessary. Sometimes love means letting go, even when every fiber of your being wants to hold on. The night before their departure, Carmen came to our house after the boys were already in bed. I never saw her so nervous, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers as she sat at our table. "I need to talk to you both," she said, her voice almost a whisper. About August. That night changed everything again. Carmen was sitting at our table, trembling like a leaf in the wind, while Robert and I waited in silence for what she had to say. The wall clock showed almost midnight, and the only sound was the ticking, marking the seconds of that moment that would forever remain in our memories. "Anthony knows," she finally said, the words coming out as if they were being torn from her. "He's always known that August isn't his son." The revelation hung over us like a heavy cloud. Robert visibly paled, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard that his knuckles turned white. As for me, I felt a chill run down my spine. All these years, all the interactions, all the Sundays shared. And Anthony knew? "What do you mean?" "He always knew," Robert managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Carmen took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "From the beginning, I told him when I found out I was pregnant. I thought about hiding it, but I couldn't. I thought he would throw me out of the house, ask for a divorce, but that's not what happened." She told us that Anthony, after the initial shock and a few days of silent fury, decided to forgive and accept the child as his own. The condition was that the real father would never be revealed, that the affair would remain buried in the past. They would move to a different neighborhood, start a new life away from Carmen's lover. "But then," I said, trying to understand, "why did you move precisely to the house across from ours? if Anthony knew about Robert. Carmen lowered her eyes. It was a coincidence at first. When I realized Robert lived here, it was too late. We had already bought the house. Anthony didn't know Robert personally, didn't know who he was. When I finally understood the situation, I was afraid to say anything. I thought if we moved suddenly, it would raise suspicions. She paused, taking a sip of the water I had served. And then August got sick, and we needed help. I told Anthony that Robert was willing to help financially, without raising questions. To my surprise, he accepted. He said August's well-being came first. It was then that I understood. All these years, there hadn't been just one secret being kept, but several. Layers and more layers of untold truths, silent agreements, survival pacts. It wasn't just Robert and I hiding what we knew from Carmen and Anthony. It was also them hiding what they knew from us, and perhaps even from themselves. "Why are you telling us this now?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Because we're leaving," Carmen replied, tears finally falling, "and because Anthony wants August to know the truth when he turns 18. He thinks the boy has the right to know his story, his origins. I wanted you to know that there will be a time when the secret will no longer be a secret." Robert looked stunned, unable to fully process what he was hearing. "He wants me to talk to August, to introduce myself as his father?" Carmen nodded slowly. "When the time comes." Anthony says he's played the role of father all these years and will continue to do so. But he doesn't want August to live in ignorance forever. It's the boy's right to know. We remained silent for a long moment, absorbing the weight of those words. The idea that in a not-so-distant future the truth would come out was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. What would this mean for all of us? For Michael, who would discover he had a brother? For August, whose identity would be completely reshaped? Before leaving, Carmen handed us an envelope with their new address in San Francisco and their phone number. "Anthony suggested that you visit from time to time. It would be good for August to maintain contact with Uncle Bob." When the door closed behind her, Robert and I looked at each other in silence. Something fundamental had changed that night. The weight of the secret felt different now, shared in a way we never imagined possible. The next morning, we helped load the last boxes onto the moving truck. August and Michael said goodbye with the sadness typical of children, intense, but not yet completely understanding the finality of adult separations. They promised to write letters, exchange baseball cards by mail, maintain their friendship despite the distance. When the truck finally departed, taking with it such a significant part of our lives, I stood beside Robert on the sidewalk, watching until it disappeared around the corner. He didn't cry, but there was a quietness in his face that spoke more than any tears. "Shall we visit them for Christmas?" I said, squeezing his hand. It wasn't a question. The years that followed brought changes no one could have foreseen. America entered deeper into the Vietnam War. The news was filtered, freedoms restricted, fear hung in the air like an insidious perfume. Robert was laid off from the steel mill in 1969 when he participated in a strike. He was unemployed for almost 6 months before getting a position at a smaller factory with reduced pay. Despite the financial difficulties, we kept our promise to visit August's family regularly. At first, we went to San Francisco twice a year during the July school vacation and at Christmas. As the economic situation became more complicated, we reduced to one annual visit, but we never stopped going. Anthony always received us with a formal cordiality that to outside eyes might have seemed just the politeness between old acquaintances. But there was a silent understanding between the 3 adults in the situation, an unspoken pact of peaceful coexistence for the good of the children. Observing Robert and Anthony talking about baseball or politics, sitting on the porch with their beers, was witnessing one of the strangest and most complex human negotiations I've ever seen. 2 men who loved the same son, each in his own way, finding a way to share this fatherhood without ever mentioning it. August grew up strong and healthy, the surgery having corrected much of his heart problems. He became an intelligent and sensitive teenager, passionate about literature and music. Michael, in turn, followed more in his father's footsteps, skilled with his hands, interested in mechanics and construction. It was fascinating to observe how two brothers who didn't know they were brothers could be so different and yet develop such a strong bond in the few weeks they spent together each year. In 1973, when August turned 18, we anxiously awaited the moment of revelation. Robert spent sleepless nights, mentally rehearsing what he would say, how he would explain the choices of the past, how he would ask forgiveness without seeming to be seeking a place he had never officially occupied. But the phone call from Carmen we received a week after the birthday brought different news than we expected. "Anthony decided it's not yet the time," she said, her voice low on the phone, as if she feared being overheard. "August is about to take his college entrance exams. It's a crucial moment. Anthony thinks the truth could destabilize him now." Robert was devastated, though he tried not to show it. Part of him had prepared for years for that moment of recognition, to finally be able to say, "I am your father." To have this possibility again postponed to an indefinite future was like losing his son a second time. "He has the right," Robert murmured that night as we prepared for bed. "Anthony has the right to make that decision. He's been a father for 18 years. I've been just a shadow." Despite the disappointment, we continued our routine of visits. August entered college, determined to become a teacher. Michael finished high school and began working with Robert in the auto repair shop he had managed to open after years of saving. Our life followed an apparently normal course, but always with that underlying expectation, that dormant truth that could awaken at any moment. In 1976, when August was in his last year of college, we received the news that would once again change the course of our lives. Anthony had been diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. The doctors gave him no more than 6 months to live. We traveled to San Francisco as soon as we heard. Anthony was unrecognizable, thin and jaundiced, the disease consuming him rapidly. Despite his condition, he insisted on speaking with Robert alone. The two men shut themselves in the small office of the apartment for almost 2 hours. I never knew exactly what was said in that conversation, but when Robert came out, his eyes were red and there was a new determination in his bearing. "Anthony wants to tell the truth to August before he passes," he informed me that night in the hotel room where we were staying. "He wants me to be present. Says it's time for all secrets to be revealed." The moment we had so long awaited and feared would finally arrive, but not in the circumstances anyone might have wished. There would be no celebration, just the solemnity of imminent death hanging over the revelation. The conversation happened 2 weeks later, when we returned to San Francisco. Anthony had worsened considerably in this short period. He was bedridden, needing oxygen to breathe. Even so, he insisted on being seated in the living room when August arrived from college. Carmen, Robert, and I waited in almost absolute silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The sound of the key in the lock startled us all. August entered, surprised to find us gathered with such grave expressions. "What happened, Dad? You should be in bed," he said immediately, concerned about Anthony. "Son," Anthony replied with a weak voice, "there's something important I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." I stayed in the kitchen with Carmen during the conversation. It wasn't our place to be present at that moment between the 3 men. The father who raised, the biological father, and the son who didn't know he had 2 fathers. We could occasionally hear murmurs, August's voice rising in shock or confusion, then long periods of silence. After what seemed like an eternity, Robert came to call us. We found August sitting next to Anthony, holding his hand, silent tears streaming down both their faces. When he saw us, the young man stood up and walked directly to Robert, facing him with an intensity that broke my heart. For a terrible moment, I thought he was going to explode in anger, reject the man who had been his biological father in secret all his life. Instead, August did something none of us expected. He hugged Robert tightly, as he had never done before. "Thank you for saving my life," he whispered, referring not just to the surgery years ago, but to all the silent support, the constant presence, even if distant, the discreet but unwavering love. In that embrace between father and son, I witnessed the dissolution of decades of secrets. I saw how the truth, even when painful, can also be liberating. I saw two men beginning to rebuild their relationship on new foundations. No longer uncle and nephew, but father and son, finally recognized by each other. Anthony passed away 3 weeks later, pacified by having finally shared the burden he had carried for so long. At his funeral, August had two men by his side to support him in his grief. Robert, his newly discovered biological father, and Michael, the brother he had just come to know as a brother. The months that followed Anthony's passing were a period of profound transformations for all of us. August, now 21, had to deal not only with the grief for the man who had raised him, but also with the complete reconstruction of his identity. Who was he now? Whose son? What part of his story was true? And what part had been built on secrets? Carmen faced her own challenge, learning to live without her husband, who, despite everything, had been her companion for more than 2 decades. And there was also the guilt, the weight of having been the origin of that entire web of complications. Many nights, during our more frequent visits to San Francisco in that period, I found her crying alone on the balcony, contemplating the life they had built together and the choices that had brought us to that point. Robert, in turn, walked on a razor's edge. He was finally free to recognize August as his son, to openly express the paternal love he had kept contained for so long. But there was also the fear of seeming opportunistic, of taking Anthony's place before his body was even cold in the ground. And there was Michael, our 19-year-old son, trying to understand how he had suddenly gained an older brother. It was Michael who surprised me with his maturity at that difficult moment. One night, as we were washing the dinner dishes in our house in Boston, after returning from one of our frequent visits to San Francisco, he said something I never forgot. "I always felt there was something special between August and us, Mom. Something more than family friendship. Now it makes sense. It's as if a missing piece had finally fit into place." I looked at my son, no longer the little boy who ran around the backyard, but a young man with his father's strong features and, perhaps, something of my stubbornness in his eyes. At that moment, I understood that, despite all the lies and omissions, we had done at least one thing right. We had raised a son capable of understanding and forgiveness. "Aren't you upset?" I asked hesitantly. "To discover that your father had another son before you? That we hid this for so long?" Michael dried his hands on the dish towel before responding thoughtfully. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't shocked at first, but the more I think about it, the more I realize you did what you believed was best for everyone. And look at August. He's an amazing guy. How can I be upset about having him as a brother?" That conversation was like a balm for my tired heart. If Michael, at 19, could find room for understanding and acceptance, perhaps there was hope for all of us. The year 1977 brought news that no one could have predicted. August, recently graduated, received an offer to teach Portuguese and literature at a school in Monterey. It was closer to us than San Francisco, an opportunity to start again in a new place, but still close enough to maintain frequent contact with Carmen and with us. Robert could hardly contain his joy when August called us with the news. The idea of having his son closer, of being able to build a more present relationship after so many years of distance, was like a dream he had never allowed himself to fully have. "Do you think he's coming because of me?" he asked me one night, his voice laden with hope and insecurity. "Or is it just the job opportunity?" "Probably a bit of both," I answered honestly. "And isn't that wonderful? It means he wants to get to know you better, that he's open to this new relationship, but also that he's independent, that he's following his own path." With August living just a few hours away, our family dynamic transformed again. He would come to spend a weekend with us every other week. At first, there was a certain formality, an excessive care in words and gestures, as if we were all walking on eggshells. But gradually, As the months passed, naturalness returned. Michael and August developed a genuine brotherhood friendship, discovering common interests despite their different personalities. Robert flourished in now recognized fatherhood, teaching August small manual skills he never had the chance to pass on before, like fixing a car, building a shelf, and choosing the best wood for a project. For me, the process was more complex. Who was I in this new configuration? I wasn't August's biological mother, nor his stepmother in the traditional sense. I was the woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal, and instead of destroying everything, had chosen a more difficult and nuanced path. I was the person who had secretly helped finance the surgery that saved his life, who had faithfully visited for years, who now opened the doors of her home and her heart to another woman's son with her husband. August seemed to sense my hesitation. One Sunday afternoon, while the other men were watching a baseball game in the living room, he found me alone in the kitchen preparing coffee. "Mrs. Williams," he said with that soft voice he used for his students, "I never properly thanked you for everything you did for me." I felt my face flush with surprise. "I didn't do anything special, August. Robert told me," he continued, ignoring my modesty, "about the embroidery money you used for my medications. About how it was your idea to organize the bazaar for my surgery. About how you never, not once, tried to prevent him from visiting me or helping me, even knowing everything." I was speechless, my hands trembling slightly as I arranged the cups on the tray. "You could have destroyed everything," he continued. "You could have told the truth, exposed my mother, pushed Robert away. It would have been your right. Instead, you chose the hardest path." "Why?" The question hung between us, demanding an honesty I rarely verbalized even to myself. "Because there was much more at stake than my wounded pride," I finally answered. "There was you, an innocent child who needed help. There was Michael, who adored his older friend. There was Robert, who, despite his mistake, was a good man trying to do what was right in an impossible situation. And there was myself. I didn't want to become a bitter person, consumed by resentment." August nodded slowly, as if absorbing every word. Then, in a gesture that caught me completely by surprise, he leaned over and kissed my forehead, the kind of kiss a son gives his mother. "Thank you for being my family too," he said simply, before taking the coffee tray and carrying it to the living room, leaving me alone with silent tears that were not of sadness, but of an emotion I still can't name to this day. In 1978, Carmen surprised us with the announcement that she would sell the apartment in San Francisco and also move to Monterey to be closer to her son. At first, I was apprehensive. How would it be to have Carmen nearby again after so many years of carefully maintained distance? But Robert gently reminded me, "She's lost a lot too, Helen, and now she's alone." So our strange family constellation expanded once more. Carmen settled in a small apartment near August's in Monterey. On special dates, birthdays, Christmas, New Year, we would all gather together. Sometimes in Monterey, sometimes in our house in Boston. To someone looking from the outside, we were just a common extended family, united by bonds of friendship and distant kinship. Only we knew the complex web of relationships that really connected us. Time, that great master, gradually softened the edges. What once was painful to remember became just a part of our shared history. The secrets, once exposed to daylight, lost some of their power to hurt. We weren't a perfect family, far from it, but we were a family that chose forgiveness over resentment, unity over division. In 1980, August introduced us to Marianne, a fellow teacher with whom he had fallen in love. A sweet and intelligent young woman who looked at him with that special admiration of first true loves. Their wedding the following year was one of the most emotional days of our lives. Seeing August at the altar with Robert as his best man was the realization of a kind of redemption no one had imagined possible. At the reception, while everyone was dancing and celebrating, I found Carmen sitting alone in a corner, observing the party with teary eyes. "He's happy," I said, sitting beside her. "You raised a wonderful man, Carmen." She looked at me with surprise, perhaps at the deliberate inclusion in that you. Anthony did most of it, she replied with a choked voice. I just complicated everything. We all make mistakes, I answered, surprising myself with the serenity I felt. What matters is what we do after them. And you two, you and Anthony, did a lot right. Look at him. I pointed to August, who was twirling on the dance floor with his bride, radiant with happiness. Thank you, Helen, Carmen whispered, covering my hand with hers. For everything, for your strength all these years. It was the first time we exchanged a truly affectionate gesture, without the weight of secrets between us. We weren't friends in the conventional sense, we never would be, but we had reached a kind of peace that had seemed impossible on that distant night in 1962, when I discovered Robert looking out the window at 4 a.m. In 1983, Caroline was born, August and Marianne's first daughter, Robert's first granddaughter, although technically Michael still didn't have children. Seeing my husband holding that little baby in the hospital, undisguised tears streaming down his wrinkled face, was one of the most profound moments of our life together. All the pain, all the sacrifices, all the complications seemed worth it in that simple moment of pure joy. Caroline was followed by Edward 2 years later, and then, in 1986, Michael finally married Denise, his longtime girlfriend. Their first child, Lucas, was born the following year. Our family continued to grow, to branch in new directions, creating new bonds that no longer depended on the secrets of the past. Wednesdays were never again a particularly tense day in our house. Robert no longer needed to wake up in the early hours to look out the window. He could simply call his son and ask how he was doing. The secret ritual that had initiated this entire journey had become just a distant memory, a story we would tell our grandchildren when they were old enough to understand. And now, sitting here at 78, looking back at all the tortuous paths that brought us to this moment, I can't help but marvel at the human capacity to overcome, to forgive, to build something beautiful from the ashes of pain. Robert passed away 5 years ago, peacefully in his sleep. August and Michael were both by his side in the hospital during his final days. Carmen left us last year after a long battle with Alzheimer's. But their legacy, the complex, imperfect, but true love they shared, continues alive in the new generations of our family. Caroline, Edward, Lucas, and their cousins grew up knowing they are family, without the secrets that separated their parents for so long. They know the complete story now, told gradually in age-appropriate parts, always with emphasis not on the mistakes, but on the redemption that came afterward. It's important for them to know where they came from, to understand that families can take unexpected forms, that true love sometimes requires sacrifice and forgiveness. When I look back at that 25-year-old Helen who discovered her husband watching the house across the street at 4 a.m., I hardly recognize myself. Such naivety, such pain still to come, but also how much unexpected joy, how much depth, how much true life that discovery would bring with it. Some might say I was weak for not having put an immediate end to that situation, for not having demanded definitive choices, for not having drawn clear lines in the sand, perhaps. But life rarely fits into neat categories of right and wrong. In the complexity of human feelings and circumstances, sometimes the most courageous act is precisely to refuse the simple and obvious solutions, and instead build something new and indefinable from the broken fragments of what already existed. If I could speak to that young Helen now, I would tell her, hold tight. The path will be long and often painful. There will be days when you'll question all your choices. But in the end, looking back, you'll see that you were part of something extraordinary, a story of redemption that spans generations. And isn't that, after all, what we all seek? Not just to live our small individual lives, but to be part of something greater, something that continues long after we're gone. Through all the complications, all the pains and joys, we managed to create a true family, not defined by blood or legal documents, but by stubborn love that refused to give up, even when it would have been easier to do so. That skinny boy with big eyes, who once struggled to breathe with his fragile heart, is today a respected man, a university professor, a loving father and grandfather. And he carries with him not just Robert's genes, but also Anthony's kindness, Carmen's strength, and perhaps, I hope, a bit of the resilience I tried to demonstrate throughout all these years. And that, my dear viewers, is the true miracle that happens when we choose love, even when it would be easier to choose hate. When we look at life not as a series of rigid rules to be followed, but as a shared journey of imperfections, forgiveness, and second chances. So, if there's one lesson I'd like to leave you with today, it's this. Don't fear the complexity of love. Don't rush to judge others' choices or even your own. Sometimes the most difficult path, the one that seems impossible to navigate, is exactly the one that will lead to the most unexpected blessings. And now, before ending this story, I want to thank all of you who have accompanied me this far, who have allowed me to share this very intimate and complex part of my life. Always remember, it's not the secrets that define us, but what we choose to do when they finally come to light. If this story touched your heart in any way, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Your comments also mean a lot to me. Let me know what you felt while listening to my story and where you're watching from today. Thank you for joining me on this journey of memories, and until the next video.